Right now, a 38-year-old making double what their parents made at the same age is statistically less likely to own a home than a 25-year-old was back in 1990.
Yeah, which is, it's honestly a staggering reality to confront.
It really is. I mean,
Mm.
think about that for a second. You do everything right. You get the degree, you climb the corporate ladder, your salary looks fantastic on paper, and yet the fundamental math of the American dream has just, well, broken.
Right, it is completely failing to function the way we were all told it would.
Exactly. Welcome to the Generational Wealth Project.
That paradox you just mentioned is exactly what's driving the current economic anxiety we see, really, across the board right now.
For sure. Because the traditional roadmap to wealth in this country was basically a three-step process, right? You secure a steady income, you buy a house, and you let time build your equity.
Yeah, but when the entry price of step 2 detaches completely from the reality of step 1, that entire roadmap just becomes useless.
Which is why we're going to look at exactly how that roadmap failed today. And honestly, more importantly, how you can draw a new one.
Because you really have to draw a new one at this point.
You do. We are doing a massive deep dive today into the underlying mechanics of the 2025 housing market. We're stripping away all those flashy headlines to look at the raw data, the systemic supply issues, the algorithmic reality of institutional investors, and some extremely
I
creative,
assume that's pretty radical, honestly.
yeah, very radical ways that regular people are hacking their way into wealth building right now. So whether you are currently spending your weekends touring open houses and constantly getting outbid,
Which is exhausting.
completely exhausting, or whether you are already locked into a mortgage and wondering how this market impacts your net worth, or even if you're happily renting and just watching this chaos from the sidelines, this deep dive is going to fundamentally change how you view real estate today.
It really requires a shift in perspective.
Mhm.
Our goal today isn't just to acknowledge that housing is expensive. I mean, anyone paying rent knows that.
Yeah, we don't need a deep dive to tell us rent is high.
Right. We need to dissect the actual mechanics of why the market is behaving this way. If you understand the underlying machinery, like how credit actually works, how supply chains impact local zoning, how interest rates alter the amortization schedule of a loan, you stop being a passive observer.
You start becoming a strategic participant.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the baseline consensus here. There is a new massive survey out regarding the American dream, and it dropped a statistic that is almost hard to believe in our highly polarized climate.
The 77% metric.
Yes, 77% of consumers now believe that homeownership is more difficult to achieve today than it was for previous generations.
Mhm.
I mean, you cannot get nearly 8 out of 10 Americans to agree on the color of the sky right now.
No, you really can't.
But they universally agree that the housing game is somehow rigged against the current generation.
And that consensus isn't based on collective pessimism, you know? It is based on a lived mathematical reality.
So it's not just a feeling.
Not at all. When you survey people on the specific economic barriers they are facing, the data points form a very clear picture. 75% cite general economic conditions. 58% explicitly point to high home prices.
Right.
51% note rising living costs. And 47% highlight high mortgage interest rates. But all of those individual data points roll up into one definitive, overarching metric that explains the whole crisis.
The price-to-income ratio.
Exactly.
So just to break that down for everyone listening, if you take the median cost of a single-family home in the U.S.
Yeah.
and divide it by the median household income, you get this ratio. It basically tells you exactly how many years of your gross salary it takes to buy an average house.
Right.
And in 2024, that multiple hit 5 times. 5 times the median household income.
Which is historically massive.
To give you some historical whiplash, throughout the entire 1990s, that ratio sat comfortably under 3. So we went from a house costing less than 3 years of your salary to 5 years of your salary.
This is where we really have to look at the physics of purchasing power. Because going from a 3x multiple to a 5x multiple doesn't just mean a house is a little harder to buy. It creates this exponential increase in difficulty that completely disqualifies the median earner.
Disqualifies them completely.
Yeah. Let's look at the insights from Josh Bowden over at Bricadia. Since just before the pandemic, the actual price tag on single-family homes has jumped by 60% nationally.
60% in just a few years.
Right, but that is only the asset side of the equation. We also have to look at the capital side. Over that exact same period, the average mortgage rate jumped from the mid to high 3% range to the mid to high 6% range.
Wow. So the cost of the house went up 60%, and the cost of the money you have to borrow to buy the house basically doubled.
Yes, the 1-2 punch.
It's like It's like walking onto a car lot. Finding out the sedan you want is suddenly 60% more expensive than it was yesterday, and then when you sit down in the finance office, they tell you the interest on your car loan is twice as high. You are getting squeezed on the principal and the interest simultaneously.
Precisely. It's a treadmill that is accelerating away from you. And this double squeeze completely shatters the debt-to-income limits that banks use to approve loans.
The DTI limit.
Right. When a bank looks at you, they calculate your DTI, your total monthly debt payments, divided by your gross monthly income. They typically want your housing payment to stay under 28% of your gross income.
Which used to be reasonable.
It was. But when the house costs 60% more and the interest rate doubles, that monthly payment skyrockets, pushing the median earner way past that 28% threshold. The bank simply says no.
But wait, I have to push back here for a second. We hear people say all the time, well, wages have gone up since the pandemic. And, I mean, they have. So if wages are up somewhat, doesn't that offset the price increases? Why is this such an impenetrable wall if paychecks are bigger than they were in 2019?
It's a fair question, but let's run the actual math to see why wage growth hasn't saved the buyer. Let's take a hypothetical home buyer in the 1990s making $50,000 a year.
Okay.
With a price-to-income ratio of under 3x, they're looking at a house priced around $140,000. They put down a modest down payment, secure a mortgage, and their monthly payment comfortably clears that bank DTI requirement.
Right.
They have cash flow left over at the end of the month. If the roof leaks, they have the liquid savings to fix it.
Okay, that sounds entirely reasonable. That's the dream we were sold.
Yeah, let's look at today's buyer. Let's give them that wage growth you mentioned. They are making $70,000 a year now. But they're dealing with a 5x multiple, so they aren't looking at a $140,000 house anymore.
No, they're looking at a house priced at $350,000 or more.
Exactly. And they have to borrow that massive principal at double the interest rate. So their income went up by $20,000, sure, but the debt they need to take on went up by over $200,000 at a higher carrying cost. The math completely collapses.
Oh, man. And that doesn't even account for the hidden costs of homeownership, which are absolutely exploding right now. I mean, we're talking about property taxes, homeowners insurance, utilities, and general maintenance.
The hidden costs are outpacing general inflation.
They really are. These are not static numbers. If the assessed value of your home goes up 60%, your local municipality is going to raise your property taxes to match.
And the insurance mechanics are even more volatile. Due to shifting climate patterns, increased severity of storms, and the massively inflated cost of raw materials needed to rebuild a home after a disaster, reinsurance companies.
Wait, reinsurance, those are the companies that insure the local insurance providers, right?
Yeah. Right. They have spiked their rates, and those costs are passed directly to the homeowner. You might budget perfectly for your mortgage payment, but if your property insurance doubles in 2 years, which is happening in several major states right now, you can suddenly find yourself unable to afford the house you already own.
That is terrifying. Okay, so the financial barrier is enormous. But let's assume for a second that you magically solve the money problem. Let's say you get a big promotion, or you inherit some cash, and you are ready to buy.
Okay, let's say you do.
You step into the market, cash in hand, and you run face first into a completely different wall. There are literally no houses to buy. We are looking at a severe systemic supply deficit right now.
The physical reality of the market is just as broken as the financial reality. In 2023, the national housing deficit hit roughly 4.7 million homes.
4.7 million.
Yeah. That means we have 4.7 million more households forming than we have physical dwellings to house them.
But how is that possible? I mean, if you drive through almost any major suburb right now, you see construction. You see cranes. You see new subdivisions going up. There was a massive post-pandemic construction boom. How are we short 4.7 million homes when we've been building for 3 years?
Because we have to look at what is actually being built and the pace of household formation. The data shows that despite the construction boom, the deficit actually grew by 159,000 homes in a single year.
So we're building, but we're going backward.
We are running a race against demographics and losing. Scott Menard from Homes Built for America points out that the biggest underlying obstacle here is supply, specifically the complete lack of entry-level starter homes.
Right. Nobody is building the 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 1,200-square-foot house anymore.
And there's a mechanical, economic reason for that. Builders are not ignoring starter homes out of spite. They're ignoring them because the math doesn't work for them either.
House.
Well, When you factor in the cost of acquiring land, navigating years of local zoning laws and environmental impact studies, and the high cost of labor and materials, a builder's fixed costs are enormous before they even pour a single concrete foundation.
Oh, I see.
If it costs a builder $300,000 just to get a plot of land ready and permitted, they cannot build a $250,000 house on it. They have to build a $600,000 luxury home just to achieve a viable profit margin.
So the new inventory hitting the market is completely mismatched with the first-time buyer's budget.
hmm
But what about the existing homes? You know, the older, smaller houses built in the 50s and 60s. Why aren't those cycling into the market for new buyers?
That brings us to one of the most powerful forces currently paralyzing the real estate ecosystem. Colin Allen calls it the lock-in effect.
The lock-in effect. This concept is wild because it basically means people are financially trapped by their own success. How exactly does the lock-in effect freeze inventory?
It comes down to the mechanics of mortgage amortization. Imagine a couple bought a starter home 5 years ago. They locked in a 30-year fixed mortgage at, let's say, 2.8%.
Which is an incredibly cheap cost of capital.
Unbelievably cheap.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today, they've had a child, they both got promoted, and they want to do what American families have historically always done, sell the starter home and move up to a larger 4-bedroom house.
Which naturally opens up that starter home for the next young couple.
Exactly. That is the normal, healthy cycle of real estate. But let's look at the math today. If they sell their current home, they are legally required to pay off that 2.8% mortgage. It disappears. To buy the larger upgrade home, they have to take out a brand new mortgage at today's rate, which might be 6.8%.
Ouch.
Because of how amortization schedules work, where the interest is front-loaded, trading a sub 3% rate for a nearly 7% rate means their monthly payment might literally double, even if the new house isn't drastically more expensive.
So they do the math and realize they can't afford to upgrade.
Exactly. They look at the numbers and realize they're paying a massive penalty just to move. So what do? They stay put. They decide to renovate the basement or add a small extension instead of moving.
They become locked into their current property by their low interest rate.
Right. The starter home never hits the market. Multiply that decision by millions of households across the country, and the entire pipeline of existing entry-level inventory completely freezes.
It is a massive game of musical chairs, but the music stopped, everyone sat down, and nobody wants to stand back up because the new chairs cost twice as much.
That's a perfect way to put it.
But wait, there are still some houses that hit the market. There is still some churn, deaths, divorces, relocations. When those rare starter homes do pop up, who is buying them?
This is where the individual buyer finds themselves in a completely asymmetrical battle. You aren't just bidding against another young couple who wants the house as much as you do. You are increasingly bidding against institutional investors.
Yes. Wall Street stepping onto Main Street. This completely changes the dynamic of the transaction. How are first-time buyers supposed to compete with a multi-billion-dollar fund? It's like scalpers at a concert with infinite money buying up the front row before you can even refresh the page.
Generally, they can't compete because the mechanics of the transaction are entirely different for an institution. When you or I go to buy a house, we have to jump through hoops. We need a mortgage pre-approval, we need an appraisal to ensure the bank isn't lending us more than the home is worth, and we need a home inspection because we can't afford to buy a house with a collapsing foundation.
Right. And all those contingencies take time, usually 30 to 45 days to close.
And the seller has to wait through all of that, hoping your financing doesn't fall through at the last minute. Now look at the institutional investor. They have access to wholesale capital. They aren't going to a local bank branch for a mortgage. They are using massive commercial credit facilities or floating corporate bonds at much lower interest rates.
Which is a huge advantage.
Huge. And they utilize proprietary algorithms that scrape the multiple listing service the exact second a property goes live. Their software analyzes the zip code, the historical appreciation, and the rental yield, and instantly generates an offer.
An all-cash offer.
An all-cash offer, often significantly above asking price, waiving the appraisal, waiving the inspection, and promising to close in 10 days. If you are a seller sitting across the table looking at a young couple who needs a 45-day close with 3 different contingencies versus a hedge fund offering cash in a week with 0 contingencies.
The rational economic choice is to take the institutional money.
Exactly.
So the scarce inventory that does exist is actively being siphoned out of the individual buyer pool and absorbed into permanent corporate rental portfolios. But let's look at the credit side of this. Let's say you find a house, the seller likes your family, they reject the corporate offer, and you go to the bank. We are seeing a massive credit crunch right now that is quietly shutting people out.
The credit environment has shifted dramatically. In October 2023, the average U.S. credit score declined for the first time in over a decade.
First time in over a decade.
Yeah. And simultaneously, looking at data between 2024 and 2025, banks have significantly tightened their lending standards, specifically on non-conforming mortgages.
Let's break down both of those things. First, why did the average credit score drop after 10 years of steady climbing?
It is a direct symptom of the broader macroeconomic squeeze we discussed earlier. Credit scores are heavily influenced by credit utilization, how much of your available credit you are currently using.
Okay.
With persistent inflation driving up the cost of groceries, gas, and utilities, many consumers exhausted their liquid savings buffers. To maintain their baseline standard of living, they started putting regular expenses on credit cards and carrying the balances month to month.
Oh, I see.
Their utilization ratio spiked, which automatically dragged their credit scores down. This disproportionately hits younger buyers who simply haven't been in the workforce long enough to build deep cash reserves.
So right at the moment, a young buyer needs pristine credit to get approved for these massively inflated home prices. Their credit takes a hit just from trying to survive inflation.
Exactly.
And then the banks tighten the standards on non-conforming mortgages. What exactly makes a mortgage non-conforming?
A conforming mortgage is a loan that adheres to a very strict set of guidelines laid out by government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These guidelines dictate the maximum loan amount, the minimum credit score, and the maximum debt-to-income ratio. If a bank originates a conforming loan, they can easily sell it on the secondary market. It is highly liquid and low risk for the bank.
So a non-conforming loan is...
And anything that falls outside those boxes, maybe the buyer's credit is slightly lower, maybe they are a freelancer with unconventional income documentation, or maybe the loan amount is massive, often called a jumbo loan.
But wait, if banks are tightening their standards on those non-conforming loans, isn't that exactly what we want them to do? After the 2008 financial crisis, the entire global economy nearly collapsed because banks were handing out subprime mortgages to people with zero income verification. We spent a decade begging banks to manage risk properly. Now they are doing it, and we are complaining that it's a credit crunch. Aren't they just being responsible?
It is a completely valid point. The banks are behaving rationally to protect their balance sheets in a highly volatile economic environment. The problem is the macro-level consequence of that micro-level responsibility.
Right.
In 2008, the pendulum swung wildly toward reckless loose lending. Today, it has swung so far toward extreme risk aversion that perfectly capable individuals, freelancers with strong cash flow but fluctuating monthly incomes, or young professionals with thin but clean credit files are being entirely shut out. The banks are safe, but the collateral damage is the exclusion of a massive swath of potential buyers.
And when you layer all of these systemic failures together, the prices, the supply deficit, the lock-in effect, the institutional investors, and the tight credit, it is creating a profound demographic shift. It's fundamentally altering the timeline of adulthood in America.
The demographic data is perhaps the most sobering part of this entire analysis. We are watching major life milestones being forcibly delayed by economic mechanics.
The 2025 survey data measures what you could call demographic despair. 41% of Gen Z and 32% of millennials who dream of owning a home fear they will never be able to afford one. We aren't talking about people who don't want to buy. We are talking about people who actively want the traditional American dream and have fundamentally given up hope of achieving it.
What's fascinating here is that psychological despair is manifesting in very real behavioral data. If we look at the median age of a first-time homebuyer, it reached an all-time high of 38 years old in 2024.
38. And just to anchor that, where was it historically?
Historically, dating back to the 1980s, the median age for a first-time buyer has hovered comfortably in the late 20s. Even as recently as 2023, the median age was 35.
Wait, really? A 3-year jump in 1 year.
We saw a massive 3-year jump in a single calendar year. We have pushed a foundational wealth-building milestone back by a full decade.
But wait, is this purely a housing cost issue? Or are we confusing correlation with causation? Millennials and Gen Z are getting married much later than their parents did. They're having children later, or opting out of having children entirely. If people are choosing to stay single and hypermobile in their 20s and 30s, wouldn't they naturally delay buying a house regardless of the price?
Demographic lifestyle shifts certainly play a role, but the data clearly indicates that economics are the primary driver, not preference. If it were purely a lifestyle choice, you wouldn't see 42% of millennials expressing absolute despair over never affording a home.
That makes sense.
You also have to look at the unique financial burdens this specific demographic carries, most notably student loan debt. Student debt alters the mathematical reality of buying a house long before lifestyle choices even factor in.
Let's break down that mechanism, because people often dismiss student loans by saying, well, it's just a couple $100 a month, just budget for it. How does a student loan actually destroy a mortgage application?
It goes right back to the debt-to-income ratio, the DTI limit we discussed earlier. When an underwriter evaluates your mortgage application, they aren't just looking at the monthly payment of the student loan, they are factoring that debt into your total liability profile.
Right.
If you graduate with $60,000 in student loans, you are starting your adult financial life with a massive, unsecured debt anchor. Even if your monthly payment is manageable, that debt restricts how much additional principal the bank is legally allowed to let you borrow. It artificially compresses your purchasing power right as housing prices are expanding exponentially.
It's like entering a marathon. But right at the starting line, the officials strap a 50-pound backpack onto you. You are expected to catch up to an accelerating target, the 5x price-to-income ratio, while carrying a massive structural disadvantage that previous generations simply did not have.
Exactly.
And there's a much darker ripple effect to this delay. Let's look at the long-term timeline. If the median age of a first-time buyer is now 38, and they take out a standard 30-year mortgage, what does that mean for their future?
It means they are fundamentally jeopardizing their retirement. Mathematically, if you originate a 30-year mortgage at age 38, you will not make your final payment until you are 68 years old.
Right at or past the traditional retirement age.
Exactly. The historical wealth building model relied on buying a home in your late 20s. By your late 50s, the house is paid off. That gives you an entire decade, your peak earning years, where your largest monthly living expense has completely vanished.
And then you invest that extra money.
Right, you take that money and aggressively funnel it into your retirement accounts, mutual funds, or bonds. You turbocharge your liquid net worth right before you retire. By shifting the starting line to 38, you completely erase that prime wealth-building window. You carry your heaviest debt burden straight into your retirement years, which means you have to work longer or retire with significantly less security.
So this housing crisis is actually a retirement crisis incubating in plain sight. That is heavy. And it leads us to a critical pivot. If the traditional rules of the game have failed, if the old strategy of graduating, saving a little, and buying a starter home at 27 is mathematically dead, how do you play the new game? We need to shift from the bleak reality to actionable, strategic counteroffensives.
This requires a complete reevaluation of conventional financial wisdom. When the macroeconomic environment undergoes a structural shift, relying on advice from the 1990s is not just unhelpful, it is financially dangerous.
Analysts outline 4 core strategic pillars for budgeting in this new reality. Let's go through them. The first is building a highly strategic spending plan. We aren't just talking about a vague mental budget. We're talking about aggressive tracking, meticulous meal planning to eliminate discretionary food costs, and routinely negotiating fixed premiums like auto and health insurance.
That's step one.
Right. The second pillar is automating monthly savings. This means utilizing payroll deductions to send money directly to a high-yield savings account, completely bypassing your primary checking account. The third is expanding income streams. The logic here is that there is a hard mathematical floor to how much you can cut from your budget, but there is theoretically no ceiling on what you can earn through freelance work, consulting, or secondary businesses.
And the fourth?
The fourth pillar is aggressively leveraging first-time buyer programs, things like the LA Housing Department's MIPA program, which is a municipal or state-level initiative that provides grants or forgivable loans for down payments and closing costs.
Those 4 pillars form the foundation of capital accumulation. But where the strategy gets genuinely disruptive is how you deploy that capital. We have to address one of the most ingrained pieces of financial dogma in American history, the 20% down payment.
The golden rule. We have all been taught that you must save 20% before buying a house to prove you are financially responsible and, more importantly, to avoid paying private mortgage insurance, or PMI. But wealth strategists like Eric Kroc are now looking at the math and arguing that the 20% rule is actually a massive trap.
It is a mathematical trap created by asset inflation.
Yeah.
Let's walk through a very practical scenario to illustrate why. Imagine you want to buy a house that costs $400,000.
Okay.
The traditional rule says you need 20% down, which is $80,000 in cash. Now let's assume you are an incredibly disciplined saver. You manage to save $10,000 a year specifically for this down payment, which is a very aggressive savings rate for an average earner.
Okay, so $10,000 a year, it will take you 8 years to save the $80,000.
Exactly. 8 years of flawless financial discipline. But here is the fatal flaw in the strategy. The housing market does not sit frozen in time waiting for you to save your money. Over those 8 years, the market continues to appreciate. By year 8, that $400,000 house might have appreciated to $550,000.
Which means your $80,000 is no longer 20%. You are back to square one.
Precisely. The price of the asset has literally outpaced your capacity to save. This introduces the concept of opportunity cost. By sitting on the sidelines in cash, trying to hit an arbitrary percentage goal, you missed out on $150,000 of equity appreciation. Your cash actually lost purchasing power relative to the housing market.
It's like trying to fill a leaky bucket while someone else keeps making the bucket bigger. Or, another way to look at it, it's like trying to catch a moving train by running down the tracks. You think, I'll just run until I'm going as fast as the train and then I'll hop on. But the train is accelerating. By the time you reach your top speed, the train is in the next time zone. The new strategy says you have to board the train while it is moving, even if it means paying a premium for a ticket in the back car. And that premium ticket is PMI.
That is exactly what PMI is. It is the cost of admission to get onto the equity escalator before it moves out of reach. Now, let's explain the mechanics of PMI because it is widely misunderstood. Private mortgage insurance does not protect you, the buyer.
Wait, if I am paying the premium every month, why doesn't it protect me?
Because of the risk profile of the loan. If you only put down 3 or 5%, you have very little skin in the game. If housing prices drop even slightly, you could easily owe more on the mortgage than the house is worth, what's called being underwater.
Okay, that makes sense.
If you lose your job and decide to just walk away and let the bank foreclose, the bank takes a massive loss when they sell the house. PMI is an insurance policy that you pay for, but it pays the bank if you default.
So it is essentially a penalty fee for not having enough cash.
Yes, but in a rapidly appreciating market, absorbing that penalty is often mathematically superior to waiting. Croak and other strategists suggest an alternative model, putting down 10%, absorbing the PMI, but keeping 6 months of reserve expenses completely liquid in a high-yield savings account?
And there are low down payment options, like FHA loans, that allow you to put down as little as 3.5%. But let me play devil's advocate here. If I use an FHA loan with 3.5% down, aren't I just trading the barrier of a huge down payment for the trap of a massive monthly payment filled with PMI and high interest? I mean, I'm financing 96.5% of this massively inflated asset. Is that actually a win?
It is the ultimate trade-off of the modern market. You are trading a capital barrier, the massive down payment, for a cash flow burden, the high monthly payment. You have to run the amortization schedule for your specific local market. Yes, the monthly payment will be painful, but you are freezing the purchase price of the asset in today's dollars.
Right.
If you anticipate that housing prices in your area will continue to climb, locking in the price now and dealing with the PMI is a hedge against future inflation. You can always refinance the interest rate later if rates drop, and you can petition to have the PMI removed once the home's natural appreciation pushes your equity past 20%. But you cannot retroactively buy the house at 2024 prices in 2030.
So you have to compartmentalize your income. You automate your side hustle directly into a high-yield savings account. You build that 3.5 or 10% reserve. You buy the house, and you weather the cash flow squeeze.
That's the playbook.
But we have to acknowledge a very harsh reality here. What happens when you do all of that? You budget flawlessly, you work 3 jobs, you accept the PMI, you look for a starter home, and the math still simply does not work in your city. What happens when the front door is completely bricked over?
That is the breaking point where human ingenuity takes over. When traditional pathways fail, people invent new ones. We are seeing buyers fundamentally rewrite the legal and social norms of homeownership just to get a foot in the door.
Let's talk about these radical workarounds. One of the most fascinating trends right now is co-buying. Purchasing a home with friends, siblings, or even multiple couples pooling their resources together. In 2023, Co-buying accounted for a massive 21% of all home purchases.
Over 1 in 5 homes.
Right. It settled slightly to 15% in 2024, but that is still a staggering portion of the total market.
It represents a profound cultural and legal shift. Because buying a house with a friend is not the same as renting an apartment with a roommate. You are legally tethering your financial futures together on a massive, illiquid asset. It requires treating a home purchase like a corporate merger.
Which sounds like an absolute nightmare if you don't do it right. You are essentially forming a corporate joint venture with your college buddy. You aren't just roommates, you're essentially board members of a micro real estate corporation. How does that actually work in practice?
Mechanically, it requires sophisticated legal frameworks. You cannot just put both names on the deed and hope for the best. Co-buyers need to draft comprehensive operating agreements, often forming an LLC to purchase the property. The agreement must clearly define the exit strategy.
What kind of exit strategy?
Well, what happens if one person gets married and wants to move out in 3 years, but the other person wants to stay? What happens if someone loses their job and can't pay their share of the mortgage? How is maintenance funded? How is the equity split upon a future sale?
You literally have to draft a corporate divorce settlement before you even buy the house.
Exactly. It requires a level of interpersonal maturity and legal rigor that most people don't associate with buying a house. Yet 15% of the market is navigating this complexity because it is the only viable mechanism to compete with the institutional investors and overcome the 5x price-to-income ratio. We're actually already seeing lenders recognize this trend and develop specialized fractional mortgage products designed specifically to underwrite multi-party, non-familial purchases.
Okay, so that is co-buying. Another major alternative path is the rent-to-own contract. The pitch sounds perfect. You rent a house, you agree on a purchase price for the future, and a portion of your monthly rent acts as forced savings toward your down payment. It sounds like a seamless on-ramp to ownership.
It sounds ideal, but the mechanics of rent-to-own contracts harbor significant asymmetrical risk. You have to understand the financial derivatives underlying these agreements. Usually, you pay an upfront option fee to secure the right to buy the house later. You also agree to a strike price, the future purchase price.
But doesn't that shift all the market risk onto the buyer before they even own the asset? I mean, rent-to-own sounds like a dream, but aren't the upfront lock prices usually inflated? Who actually wins if the market dips? Let's say the house is worth $400,000 today. The contract might set the future strike price at $450,000. What happens if the local market tanks, and in 3 years the house is only worth $350,000?
That is the exact danger. If the market dips, you are legally contracted to either vastly overpay for an asset that is underwater on day one, or you walk away from the contract. If you walk away, you forfeit your upfront option fee and you forfeit all the extra rent premiums you paid over those 3 years that were supposedly building your down payment.
No.
The landlord keeps the house and all your accumulated cash. It is an incredibly high-wire act that requires precise local market forecasting.
It sounds like playing options in the stock market, but you are living inside the option. What about shared equity programs?
We are seeing local municipalities and nonprofits step in to offer these. The mechanics here are that the program provides a massive chunk of the purchase price, maybe 20 or 30%, so a lower-income buyer can actually afford the mortgage. But there is a massive catch on the back end.
The catch redefines the very nature of the asset. In a shared equity model, when the buyer eventually decides to sell the house, there is a legal cap on how much of the appreciation they are allowed to keep. The surplus equity is essentially returned to the program to subsidize the next buyer.
So let's look at that trade-off. You get the immediate physical stability of homeownership. You get a fixed monthly payment that won't jump 10% a year like rent. And you are slowly paying down the principal, which is forced savings. But you are explicitly sacrificing the lottery ticket aspect of real estate. You will never experience that massive windfall where you sell the house 10 years later and walk away with $300,000 in tax-free profit. Correct. It changes the home from an investment vehicle, an engine of capitalistic wealth generation, into a pure utility vehicle. It provides shelter and baseline stability, but it will not make you rich. And for many people currently trapped in volatile rental markets, that is a trade-off they are desperately willing to make.
And then, of course, there's the classic fixer-upper. Colin Allen talks about this. Buying a dilapidated house below market value and building sweat equity. But honestly, given the massive inflation in building materials and the severe shortage of skilled contractor labor right now, remodeling a kitchen can cost $70,000. The cheap fixer-upper is often a myth today.
which forces us to ask a much deeper structural question.
So what does this all mean? If you have to go through all of this, if you have to form an LLC with 3 friends, or risk a predatory rent-to-own contract, or sign away your future equity to a nonprofit, or spend all your weekends doing drywall just to own a piece of property, is the house even worth it?
That question strikes at the core of our modern financial identity. If the mechanisms required to achieve the goal become more punishing than the reward itself, you have to reevaluate the goal.
Historically, the American dream was inextricably linked to physical equity. Upward mobility meant a deed to a plot of land with a physical structure on it. It was a tangible marker of having made it. But that historical definition was built for a completely different macroeconomic era. Let's look at modern career mobility. In 2024, the median employee tenure at a job was just 3.9 years. The days of working at the local factory for 40 years and retiring with a gold watch are gone. People jump from company to company and city to city every 4 years to secure salary bumps.
And this is where the strict mathematical reality of renting versus buying completely inverts the traditional wisdom.
Right.
Let's go back to the amortization schedule we discussed earlier. If you buy a home, you pay massive closing costs, upfront lender origination fees, title insurance, appraisal fees, local transfer taxes. That can easily be 3 to 5% of a loan amount. Then you start making your monthly payments. On a 30-year fixed mortgage for the first 5 to 7 years, your monthly payment is overwhelmingly comprised of interest going to the bank, not principal paying down your debt.
Wait, explain that clearly. If my mortgage payment is $3,000 a month, how much is actually going into my own pocket as equity in year 1?
At today's interest rates, very little. Out of that $3,000, maybe $2,500 is pure interest profit for the bank, and only $500 reduces your loan balance.
That is brutal.
It is the mathematical reality of amortization. Now, combine that with the 3.9-year job tenure. If you buy a house, pay all the closing costs, pay 3 years of heavy interest, and then get a great job offer in a new city requiring you to sell the house, you have built almost zero equity from your payments. Furthermore, when you sell, you have to pay a real estate agent 5 or 6% of the sale price. Unless the local market experienced explosive abnormal appreciation in those exact 3 years, you will literally lose money by owning that home.
So in an environment where your career requires extreme geographical agility, a physical house is actually a massive financial liability. Renting, in that context, is not a failure. It is a tangible financial asset. You are preserving your capital and your mobility. You don't pay a 6% transaction penalty every time you need to move for a 30% pay bump.
Exactly, and the survey data clearly shows that Americans are internalizing this mathematical shift. The definition of the American dream is rapidly evolving away from physical real estate.
The numbers on this are fascinating. When the 2025 survey asked respondents to define what constitutes the American dream today, the goal shifted dramatically toward financial liquidity and security. Retiring comfortably was cited by 86%. Affording quality health care was also at 86%. Living entirely debt-free hit 84%.
And owning a home.
Owning a home came in at 85%.
Look closely at those margins. It's a massive cultural shift that living debt-free and affording health care are practically tied with, or explicitly beating, homeownership as the ultimate goal in the minds of Americans.
The culture is pivoting. Eric Kroek's thesis is literally that homeownership is not a strict requirement for building generational wealth. The idea that equity must come in the form of a physical house with a picket fence is outdated dogma.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the American dream hasn't died. It has been digitized and diversified. You can build substantial net worth through REITs real estate investment trusts. You can utilize platforms that offer fractional shares of rental portfolios or invest aggressively in small business ownership. The new definition emphasizes appreciating assets, net worth, and absolute control over your lifestyle. It prioritizes flexibility over bricks and mortar.
Let's break down the REIT, because that is a perfect example of this shift. What exactly is a REIT mechanically, and why does it replace the need to buy a physical rental property?
A real estate investment trust is a company that owns, operates, or finances income-generating real estate. It could be a portfolio of apartment complexes in Texas, a series of logistics warehouses in Ohio, or skyscrapers in Manhattan. By law, to maintain their specific tax status, a REIT must pay out at least 90% of its taxable income to shareholders in the form of dividend.
Oh, wow.
When you buy a share of a REIT on the stock market, you are legally entitled to a portion of the rent collected from those properties.
So get the cash flow of a landlord without any of the physical liability.
Exactly. You own a piece of a skyscraper from your phone without ever fixing a leaky roof. And crucially, it is perfectly liquid. If you buy a physical duplex to rent out, your capital is trapped. If you suddenly need cash for a medical emergency, you cannot sell just the kitchen of the duplex by Tuesday. But if you own $100,000 in a REIT and you need cash, you can sell shares on your phone at 10:00 a.m. and have the cash in your account by 2:00 p.m.
It's like comparing traditional home equity to a giant ship's anchor. An anchor is fantastic if your primary goal is to be perfectly safe and completely stationary in one single spot. It locks you down. But an anchor is terrible if you need to sail to where the fish are. Right now, the modern economy demands that young professionals sail. But let me ask you this. Looking at the purely mathematical view of renting versus buying, you cannot live inside a stock portfolio. You can't paint the walls of a real estate investment trust.
Right.
At the end of the day, if you rent, you do not control the shelter over your head. A landlord can still decide to raise your rent by 20% or refuse to renew your lease because they want to sell the building. Doesn't renting, even if it allows you to invest heavily in the stock market, leave you fundamentally and permanently vulnerable on a basic human level? What about the psychological safety?
That is the essential tension. Renting carries a fundamentally different risk profile, and the psychological safety of physical ownership is very real. You are trading financial risk for physical risk. Let's contrast two illustrative lives to see how this plays out in the real world. Consider a homeowner who bought a house in a mid-sized town where the primary industry, perhaps a massive manufacturing plant, just shut down.
A classic
Yeah.
Rust Belt scenario or a one-company tech town.
Right. The local economy collapses because everyone loses their jobs, housing demand plummets, the homeowner's physical house begins aggressively depreciating in value. They find a new job 2 states away, but they cannot move because if they sell the house, they will have to bring cash to the closing table just to pay off the mortgage they owe.
Wow.
They are physically secure in their shelter, but they are completely financially trapped by their depreciating asset.
They are essentially held hostage by the house.
Now contrast that with a renter living in the exact same town. The plant shuts down, the renter's lease is up in 3 months. They find that same new job 2 states away, securing a 30% pay bump. They pack their apartment, hand the keys back to the landlord, and drive away.
Because they have that flexibility.
Yes, their wealth wasn't tied up in the local soil. It was quietly growing in index funds and fractional real estate, completely insulated from the local economic collapse. The homeowner had physical safety but massive financial vulnerability. The renter had physical vulnerability. They could be evicted, but they possessed immense financial agility, which allowed them to escape a dying local economy.
Wow. That completely flips the script on what security actually means in the 21st century.
Yeah.
It is not about the walls around you. It is about the liquidity of your options. The ability to pivot is the new equity.
Agility is the ultimate hedge against macroeconomic volatility.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. We have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have. To quickly synthesize everything we've unwound today, yes, the mathematical reality of traditional homeownership is brutally hard right now. We've seen how the mechanics of a 4.7 million supply deficit, the lock-in effect of amortization schedules, the algorithmic power of institutional investors, and the shrinking credit box have collectively built a fortress wall around the traditional market. The historical roadmap is broken.
But we've also seen that by fundamentally rethinking how we deploy capital, by redefining down payments, accepting PMI to catch the moving train, getting legally creative with co-buying frameworks, or fundamentally shifting your wealth-building strategy toward liquid digital assets, the core objective of the American dream is still very much alive. It just looks different. It requires a new set of tools.
The rules of the game have undeniably changed, but the game remains entirely playable if you adapt your strategy to match the current mechanics.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to ponder. We have focused intensely on individual strategies today, how you personally can build wealth. But zoom out and think about the macro-level implications of this shift. If an entire generation of millions of young people permanently gives up on buying physical homes and instead pours all their capital into digital fractional assets, REITs, and hypermobile renting, what happens to the physical communities they actually live in?
It raises profound questions about civic engagement.
Exactly. Does a neighborhood fundamentally change when literally everyone on the block is a temporary, highly mobile renter? Who volunteers for the PTA? Who fights City Hall for better sidewalks or local parks when nobody's net worth is tied to local soil? If our wealth is entirely in the cloud, what happens to the ground we walk on?
That is the next great socioeconomic experiment we are currently living through.
It is something to seriously think about as you navigate this wild market. If you found this mechanical breakdown helpful and you want to keep learning how to navigate these systemic shifts, please make sure to like and subscribe to the Generational Wealth Project. We are constantly analyzing the raw data and the underlying mechanics so you can strategically build your future.
Thank you for joining us. Keep questioning the traditional financial scripts and always run your own math.
Until next time, remember that the white picket fence might have turned into a fortress wall. But as we learned today, whether you find a new way over the wall or simply walk away to build wealth on a completely different path, the choice is ultimately yours. See you next time on the Generational Wealth Project.